The Autobiography of Malcolm X is the first book I ever read twice. It'll probably be the first book I ever read 3 times. If you haven't read it, Malcolm X was a civil rights leader who, when he was younger, was arrested following a string of robberies, and when he was in prison got introduced to the Nation of Islam, which is a cult that kind of took the boilerplate of Islam, made some creative reinterpretations of historical fact and religious doctrine, sprinkled on some extra nonsense, and sold itself as a form of black nationalism. After his release from prison, Malcolm became the national spokesperson for them. At some point, he became aware of hypocrisies within the organization and left, or was ousted. Afterwards, he had a kind of epiphany where he expanded his worldview and his understanding of race, and specifically racism. If you only ever read one book, read more than one book. Malcolm X took direct action to improve the lives of people in his community, and when confronted with new information that contradicted his worldview, he changed his mind. In the beginning of the book, in describing his childhood, he says he learned if you want something, you have to make noise. One morning a few years ago when I was driving to work, the sun was orange in the sky behind smoke from the forest fires on the other side of the continent, while that same day, the billionaire owner of a company with a turnover rate so high its upper management was afraid they'd run out of workers rode a cock-shaped rocket into space. My country is targeting immigrants and queer people and dismantling institutions as it marches into fascism. We're locked into warming that might permanently destabilize the global climate. There's room for improvement in humanity's relationship with itself and the earth. Award-winning political scientists Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alistair Smith show in this clever and accessible book that the difference between tyrants and democrats is just a convenient fiction. Governments do not differ in kind, but only in the number of essential supporters, or backs that need scratching. The size of this group determines almost everything about politics, what leaders can get away with, the quality of life, or misery under them. Drawn from the latest developments in game theory and political science, the picture the authors paint is not pretty, but anyone seeking to improve human governance must begin with the Dictator's Handbook. It's a good book. The behavior of leaders is influenced by the requirements for them to maintain power. Countries whose wealth can be harvested by few unskilled hands of the unhealthy and undernourished, under duress, don't need the permission of the population to act. Countries whose wealth is well distributed across the activity of a complex economy of the well-educated can't take action to sabotage those producing that wealth. The leader of the country only needs to listen to you if you determine whether or not they stay in power. Where fewer people are required, the system is more despotic, and where more, it's more democratic. The more people required for a leader to remain in power, the better. That's why democracy is good. In a straight democracy, the actions you take as a leader need to benefit most people in order for you to remain in power. Democracy, when well executed, is better for the largest number of people. Democracy is the best option. Democracy is fragile. Even from the starting point of a perfectly healthy democracy, death is an election away. You are not immune to misinformation. The only reliable way to ensure that you're making good decisions is to get yourself educated and informed to the best of your ability. Democracy is driven by the decisions of the population. So, in a democracy under attack, you're likely to see higher education becoming increasingly difficult to access, funding cuts for public education, attacks against the curriculums of public education, anti-intellectualism, degradation of the factuality of news sources, misinformation campaigns, anti-science rhetoric, attacks specifically against educational programs that expand one's understanding of the social issues and political system, a massive increase in rhetoric featuring thought-terminating oversimplifications or outright lies. You see where I'm going with this. Without being well educated and informed, you cannot reliably make the best decisions. Without access to education and information, democracies die. The Good Place is this really good TV show that I'm about to spoil. So it starts with a woman, she wakes up, they tell her that she died, there's a good place and a bad place, and she went to the good place. Shenanigans ensue, turns out she's not in the good place, and neither is anyone else.
They're never gonna call a train to take us to the bad place. They can't, because we're already here. This is the bad place.
Eventually they figure out that nobody's going to the good place. The world is so malicious and so big that just existing in it and interacting with it supports suffering and sends you to hell. Passive existence in the current state of the world supports unnecessary suffering and ecological destruction. Democracy is fragile. Even from the starting point of a perfectly healthy democracy, death is an election away. If you're not participating in the democratic process, you're making space for others who may not have your best interest in mind. Democracy doesn't just happen in the voting booth. The culture you contribute to sets the acceptable standard in societal expectations. Your silence is taken as an affirmation of your support for the status quo. If you're not actively feminist in a sexist culture, you're supporting it. If you're not anti-racist in a white supremacist society, you're part of white supremacist society. If you're not anti-fascist when Nazis take to the streets, you're making room for fascism. If you're not advocating for the climate, you're assisting in its destruction. Everyone has the responsibility of being an active participant in the world. I want to make the world a better place. I want to live up to the responsibility of being an active participant in the world. This project is how I'm going to do that. For every topic I intend to raise my voice on, I'm first going to expand my understanding of it to the best of my ability. I have a living list of educational resources to move through over time that I add to continuously. I made a living list of news sources, podcasts, RSS feeds, and joined some email lists to help keep me informed, which I'll add to and modify as I continuously evaluate the factuality of the news that I encounter. In this project, in every episode, I'll pick some topics, share what I learned about them, try to determine what direct action I can take that has the biggest impact, and then just take those actions and turn them into a checklist so that I can encourage others to follow and do them as well. I also made a Patreon. If you subscribe to, you can watch. I'll do book reports on some of the books I read for each episode and probably other stuff as well.